Welcome to Detangle, where we untangle the complexities of life, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Kinjal Goel, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Sayed Tabatabai as my guest on this episode today. Dr. Sayed Tabatabai is a nephrologist and a writer, although I should have said a writer and a nephrologist. Although he lives in San Antonio, he has a marked presence virtually and shares his life and writings on X, or Twitter as we fondly recall the platform. He is at the real Dr. T. Dr. Tabatabai's work has appeared in Medium, Physicians Weekly, and the Wall Street Journal. His book, These Vital Signs, has recently been published by HarperCollins and is already taking the literary world by storm. I'm personally having a happy fan moment because I have been reading Dr. Tabatabai's posts since years and always find myself waiting for the next one. Welcome, Doctor, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, let's get started then. So, Syed, tell me, how did this journey with words start? Have you always penned your thoughts like this?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate from a young age. My parents instilled a love of reading in me. And I think when I was young, obviously we didn't have all this internet and all, the video games and everything. So for me, my prime entertainment was reading, and I immersed myself in reading and words and in literature. And the older I got, the more my love for that, that whole experience grew. And I think from a fairly young age, I enjoyed writing also and sharing stories. And I remember distinctly when I was a child, all my friends loved comic books, and I actually like to write my own comic books. And that's
Oh,
kind of
wow.
how, yeah, I wrote, I thought I was being very creative. I wrote this whole comic book called The Elementals, and I found out that Marvel actually has a comic called The Elementals, and it was much,
Oh.
much better than my comic. But, ever since I was little, it's been something I loved, and I was fortunate to have parents who encouraged it.
Oh, that's so lovely. And you said your mother is a teacher.
Yeah, my mom was a teacher. She's retired now, but I was fortunate to get that kind of one-on-one schooling from my mother. Very young, and she is a great advocate for reading and writing and so on.
Oh, lovely. I've always noticed in all your posts, your words reflect this very deep thoughtfulness about others around you. Are you also as deeply tuned into emotions when you're working with your patients? I'm asking you this as a psychologist because, according to me, this can be a great strength or a great weakness. So, which side do you fall in?
I think for me, it's sort of achieving a balance, right?
Mhm.
You want to identify with patients as human beings and connect with them on some level, because I think that enhances your care. Obviously, and patients like to feel like there's a connection there and they're dealing with a human being and not a machine. But by the same token, you also have to keep at least a little bit of distance, just so that especially in dealing with very, difficult cases or tragic cases, or, cases where you really go through the gamut of emotion. You can get overwhelmed. It can be overwhelming, and sometimes I am overwhelmed, and I think that's okay. I think if there's a side on the divide that I would lean towards, it would be on feeling more rather than less. I think the day that I don't feel anything at all is probably the day that I have to walk away from medicine.
I think you've just put that so beautifully because if I think about it, maybe from the other side, if I'm a patient, I would rather want a doctor who's as invested as you are. Well, let's talk about your experience as a storyteller. You've been on Twitter or X since many years. You've obviously received a lot of feedback, but have you ever faced any trolling or any comments which have been extremely positive and have changed the way you write?
That's a great question. I think that anyone who puts their work onto any public platform invariably opens themselves up to, criticism. And I've been very, very fortunate that a lot of the criticism I've received has been constructive in nature and has been positive, or, has helped shape me into a better writer. And I think the thing I love the most about writing on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, by the way. I'm just going to call it Twitter.
Thank
That's all
you.
it is
I
to
love
me.
that.
To me, the greatest joy of writing on that medium has always been the ability to connect with large numbers of people, people who respond and say, I know what you're talking about. I went through that with my mother. I went through that, or I understand what that's about. And it's very gratifying, especially, I'm not really a seasoned writer per se. I'm essentially a novice. This is my first book. It meant a lot to me that I was able to connect. And yeah, there are trolls. There are people out there who their whole existence online is to get a reaction, or people who are extremely negative. I'm okay with negativity to a point, but sometimes people make it personal, or they're very rude, or any one of a number of things. And fortunately, most internet social media has the ability to block comments like that, or so on. But you have to be a little thick-skinned to put yourself in the arena, so to speak. And I'm okay with it.
Wow. So again, it's a balance, like you said earlier. There is a balance
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
good and the bad everywhere. So, how did this book, The Vital Signs, materialize? Did you always conceptualize collecting your tweets into a book, or did it happen later on?
It actually it happened later on. It actually wasn't the plan to collate the writing at all. When I first started writing, I only had 6 followers, and
Oh,
three
wow.
of them were my parents and my sister, so I wasn't exactly writing for an audience or anything like that. It was more just sort of getting my thoughts down, and it was therapeutic for me. I enjoy writing, so it was fun for me to do. But as time progressed, and I was fortunate to be able to find and tap into this large audience of people. One of the requests I got frequently was, "Is there a place where we can see all these stories, or read all these stories in one kind of centralized location?" And there were a lot of requests for a book to collate the stories. And so I toyed around with the thought of that, and actually wrote my first manuscript a few years ago. But a lot of the publishers just didn't know what to do with it, because it's kind of a strange book. If you read the book, it's got some conventional parts, but then the bulk of the writing is almost in like a poetry format, because it's converting the tweets over into written words. So a lot of people didn't want to take risks. A lot of the questions I got are, what are the audience for this? Can you just write a normal book? Can you just change this to like conventional writing? And so that was the struggle for me for a couple of years. But I was fortunate to find a team of people who believed in my vision, and were able to bring this book together. And I had a really great editor, Adenike Olanraju, and I worked with Lisa Sharkey at HarperCollins. And I think they made it better. I think they took what I had, and helped me to shape it, and make a stronger book out of it.
From my personal experience, what I used to do earlier on with your tweets, I used to love some of those stories so much. I would just copy paste them and share them with some of my friends who read. And eventually I realized that I would send a lot of them to a couple of friends, and that became my own personal thread to read whenever I wanted to go back. So, in a way, even I was doing exactly what you did. I was collecting your writings in one place.
Oh, that means a lot to me. It's actually kind of hard to do if you don't do that, because I tweet about all sorts of stuff, and if you're trying to specifically find the writing, sometimes it can be hard to dig through all the tweets and discover where the stories are hidden.
True. So, how has the audience response been to the book so far? Any fan mail or any unexpected response from somebody you didn't know earlier?
Yeah, it's been great. One of the things I've loved the most about this book is people have shared photos of them reading it, and in all sorts of places all over the world. And I've gotten such a tickle out of that, because it's so strange to me. And I think on some psychological level, have not fully grasped the idea that I've published a book, in the sense that it's out there in the world and people are reading it. It's so surreal to me. I get photos of people reading it on the beach, and
Oh, I've seen
this
those. Yes, they're beautiful.
Yeah, and then Joel Toff, one of my followers, I consider him my mid Twitter friends, sent me a photo, and he left the book in a library in this mountain resort, and
Oh, wow.
it's just been great to see people sharing it and people saying positive things about it online, and also, I like that people are finding it who didn't follow me on Twitter. Some people, I've done some book readings, and people have come up to me who have no idea, what I do on Twitter, and have just liked the stories for their own sake, which means a lot to me too. That's gratifying as a writer.
True, not everybody is on social media, although there is such a large audience online. There's also an equally large number of people who are reading offline and who also want to read what you've written. So I think this is a great move to bring it all together in a book, in something tangible, something which can travel, like you said, even faster than online tweets now.
Right. Yeah, and I think, and the other thing I like about the book is it's not overwhelming. It's a very quick read. It's very small, very short, very quick. And I think that makes it in many ways a great gift for people, especially people who are considering medicine as a career, or not even just medicine as a career. In fact, most of the stories aren't necessarily about purely medical topics. It's about humanism, right, and about
Right.
connecting with people, and so I think that it worked out in that way.
Lovely. So, I wanted to ask you this, Syed. I couldn't help but notice. The name of your book has a tagline: A Doctor's Notes on Life and Loss in Tweets. Now, with Twitter changing its name to X, yeah, we said we'll still call it Twitter, but something has been lost along the way. I think even your book cover, the blue, it somehow reminds me of the little blue bird of Twitter. Do you think this is even more precious now because you've frozen the memory of tweeting forever?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. It's been kind of heartbreaking for me a little bit as to what's happened to Twitter. You're correct. The blue of the book cover is an intentional nod to the blue of Twitter. And actually, if you look on the cover, the little hummingbird icon that we
Yeah.
used for one of the stories was a direct reference to the Twitter bird. It's facing the same direction. It has the same kind of body shape, and these were little visual cues we wanted to connect to the DNA of Twitter.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was always a risk putting that tagline in because with any sort of social media, you're instantly tying yourself to a moment in time when you refer to it. If I'd written a book about MySpace, for example, or something like that. But I figured, it's true. It's the nature of what I wrote, and I think the fact that it's a callback to the way Twitter was, to me, makes it even more special and precious. I mean, we literally published this in May, and now we're in September, and it's all gone, right? I mean, it's still there, but what it was when we published it has already changed.
Yeah, it just sort of makes you feel everything, including social media is so it's ever changing and never changing. So you have your followers, but you don't have the name.
Right, right, and I think the nature of my writing has also changed on X, Twitter, whatever.
Hmm.
In that, I built a lot of my following by writing stories fairly regularly and putting stories out maybe once or twice a week, and people would follow me to read the stories. And the truth is, I haven't written a new story on Twitter in months, and because all my writing right now is focused on a more conventional form of writing offline. And
Right.
so my follower count has been slowly going down. And I think it will continue to probably slowly go down because, I'm in a different phase of writing. But yeah, this book captures a moment in time, and it means a lot to me.
I think it means a lot to your readers too. I have a favorite thread that you had posted in 2020 when COVID was ravaging lives. It was about unfinished stories and the falling raindrops on the windshield of your car. Do you remember this one? Is it a part of the book too?
I do remember the story. And actually, I have a copy of the book right now, and I'm pretty sure it's part of the book. Yeah, it's called "The Meaning of Loss," and that story was on page 118 in the book. And the COVID stories in the book span an entire range of emotion and styles of writing. And the story you're referring to, The Meaning of Loss,
Mhm.
was a little bit later, after the initial the initial tidal wave, let's call it, of COVID had hit, and then we were dealing with a lot of death.
Right.
And I was trying to find a way um, to convey the idea that these statistics are a big part of what we do in medicine, right? Statistics and epidemiology and stuff. But one of the damning things about statistics is they're really, really good at taking people and turning them into numbers. And sometimes it's necessary to conceptually think of the numbers as people, because that's really when you are able to understand loss. When you look, 1.1 million Americans killed in COVID. What does that mean? That's meaningless, right? That doesn't. How do you wrap your brain around that? And so that's where the story came from. Was me thinking about this concept on a rainy day. The truth is that loss manifests in many different ways, and on that particular day when I wrote this story, I was thinking about the spaces in between, right? The gaps, the way that people, disappear from their stories, and the things they leave behind. So that's where that story came from. I'm glad it means a lot to you. It's actually one of my favorite stories, because a lot of my stories, I start out trying to do something, and I end up doing something different, and I don't come close to what my original thought was.
No, but I
But
think
with
it
this
really ran
story, I
deep.
think this story, I had an idea, and I was able to carry through with it.
It's beautiful, truly. But do you have a favorite segment in these vital signs? And I'm sure my listeners and my entire audience would love to hear an excerpt from your book if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like asking me to pick, my favorite child. It's one of those things. I have a connection to each and every one of these stories,
I'm sure.
but
But
I
we all
think the
have a
one.
favorite child, don't we?
Yeah, yeah. Oh boy, now I got to be politically careful here. Um, I think probably the story there's a couple of stories that get read the most. I mean, the story that probably is read the most or was shared the most was this one called The Red Car, which was sort of loosely based on what happened with my grandfather towards the end of his life, where he drove himself to the hospital in his favorite car.
Yes,
And
I
it was
remember
also
this
based
one.
on, yeah, it's also based on this idea that, again, things that seem pretty innocuous or pretty maybe even dull or boring can actually carry a whole lifetime of stories within them. And so that's really what The Red Car is about.
Wow. Um, do you mind reading it out for us?
Oh, sure, I can read it out. So I'll just read the story. It's not that long.
Yes, please.
Um, and so, yeah, this story I wrote in February of 2020. Um, all right, The Red Car. There is a car in the hospital parking lot. It is a faded red, covered with dust. Other cars have parked and then left on either side of it every day, but this car remains. I pass by it as I find parking on my way into work. I know what it means. There was a time when it wasn't faded red, covered in dust. There was a time, decades ago now, when it was brand new. Ruby red metallic. The car salesman flashes a winning grin. Isn't she a beauty? And to think she could be all yours. The young man smiles. In the years to come, people will often ask the young man, why did you choose the bright red car? It doesn't seem to fit his personality. He is quiet and withdrawn. His answer is always the same. It isn't red, it's ruby red. It got Dorothy home safe, and it'll do for me. Many years later, he will discover that the original novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, made no mention of ruby slippers. They were invented for the movie to sparkle in Technicolor. But that's of no matter. He drives his ruby red car everywhere, across town, across the state, across the country. When he gets married, a just married banner is hung from the rear bumper. When his wife goes into labor, that ruby red hot rod breaks every speed record in the state. With the passage of time, he has to make more practical decisions, but he can't bring himself to sell his car. It's been good to him. He knows he's being silly, it's just a machine, but he's wept behind the steering wheel, and he's laughed, and it's kept his family safe. So he stores it in his garage, and every now and then on a weekend, he tinkers with it, visiting an old friend, one who never passed judgment on him, who only served him faithfully. His kids grow older, and he grows older too. Perhaps he should sell it. Maybe it's time. It's his wife who convinces him to keep it. If it wasn't for that beautiful car, I would never have married you. He laughs. But then she says something true. It's not your car anymore. It's your friend. And there's always room for friends. He understands her wisdom. She dies unexpectedly, several years later, from cancer that had been lurking and managed to escape detection. He has lost his true love and his best friend. The raw depths of his grief threaten to submerge him, and for a time they do. And that's okay. He'll be okay. So now his favorite thing to do is take long drives in his ruby red hot rod. It's become old enough to be cool again. Retro fever. His kids want to move back home, but he assures them he's fine, not to worry. He finds happiness and freedom on the open highway. One day he wakes up with a strange pain in his chest and makes his breath catch. He thinks about calling 911, but it subsides. Just to be safe, he decides to go to the local ER, get checked out. He gets into his beloved car and turns the ignition for the last time. As he parks in the hospital parking lot, he feels strangely nervous. Maybe he should call the kids, but he doesn't want to worry them. He gets out of the car and notices a blemish in the hood. Spitting onto his palm, he wipes it clean. It is an unassuming farewell. He will die later that evening. His children don't understand. Why didn't he call them? The reports they're getting make no sense. Massive MI, heart failure, kidney failure. Failure. But he was so strong. He was dad. He is dad. They fly home that very night, numb. It will be several weeks before his daughter realizes their dad's beloved hot rod isn't in the garage after she unlocks it. They had all assumed he dialed 911. They didn't realize he drove himself to the ER. Immediately, they make their way back to the hospital to search. There is a car in the hospital parking lot. It is a faded red, covered with dust. Other cars have parked and left on either side of it every day, but this car remains. I pass by it as I find parking on my way into work. I know what it means. Sometimes I wonder how much gas is still in the tank, how many journeys were still planned or unplanned. Where did it go? Where was it going? It was a beautiful car once, I can see that. As I drive past it, I pray for rain.
Thank you so much for that, Syed. I think there is a deep, brutal honesty in these stories, which allows you to experience heartbreak and allows you to heal just between those words. It's just stunning the way you write.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. I sincerely appreciate it.
So, truly. So, let me ask you a question that I ask all my podcast guests, and I also ask the clients that I work with. We always ask patients and we ask everyone to have a first aid kit in the house, right? A first aid kit
Sure.
where you would have, your basic medicine, you would have your basic band aids, and anything for small cuts and wounds, anything to make you feel better. What about if we all had a mental first aid kit too, in which a lot of people have told me that they keep a photograph of something that makes them smile, maybe a piece of chocolate, maybe the QR code of a song that they like, anything to help them heal from a traumatic day or from some incident which made them feel bad just that day. If you were to have a mental first aid kit like this, what would you put in it?
I would put a notepad and some pens.
Mhm.
I would put a copy of an album called Sam's Town by my favorite band, The Killers.
All right.
I would put a photograph of my family and my uncle's wedding when I was a child. And I would put a copy of my grandfather's book of poetry that he wrote that was published after his death.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I think that would just be so perfect for a day when the clouds have gathered and when you need just a little bit of sunshine. So thank you for sharing that.
It's a great question. I think we should all think about it too, because answering that question forces you to prioritize what matters to you, and really think about the things you would turn to.
It does, and when you have a box like this, which is handy, you never know when it's going to just cheer you up. And all of us need that little cheering up sometimes. So I have my own box and it always works for me.
Yeah, I think I need to make my own box after this interview.
Oh, that'll be lovely. That'll be my win for the day. Sayed, any questions for me as a psychologist? I always leave it open at the end of my podcast. Do you want to ask me anything?
Yeah. What do you turn to? You mentioned your box. What's in your box to make you feel better?
So, my box keeps changing every few years. I always have QR codes of some of my favorite songs, both in Hindi and in English. I also have a notepad and a pen. I also have some poetry that my grandfather wrote. So he wrote in two languages as well. And I have a photograph of my girls when they were very young and they were walking down a garden path, I remember. And they were holding hands, and I took this photograph from the back because they were very queasy when I was photographing them from the front. And it's just these two little girls walking hand in hand, and that always makes me smile. So it's a little box, but it keeps changing, and I keep updating the chocolate bar in that.
How beautiful! I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. So, one of my final questions, Syed, for today. You are
Sure.
working on a new book, and I would love to get a sneak peek. What is it about? What's coming up next for us? How much can you talk about it? Do share.
Oh my goodness. So this is actually, I think this is the first I've talked about this on any one of my talks or interviews. So this is your exclusive sneak
Oh,
sneak
yay.
preview.
Thank you.
So one of the short stories, actually a couple of the short stories in my collection, are in the science fiction genre, and I love science fiction because I'm a nerd and it tickles my creative juices to think about what the future could look like. And one of the short stories in the book is called The Handholder.
Hmm.
And it basically envisions a future where medicine has become so, I guess, technologically advanced that only the basically the poorest, most desperate people actually get a human doctor. If
Hmm.
you have any means whatsoever, you get an artificial intelligence that's incredibly powerful, and the human doctors that take care of these patients have very limited means, so they're referred to derogatively as handholders because there's not a whole lot they can do. And so that idea of what does medicine look like on the brink of society, on the brink of humanity, years in the future. There've been a lot of stories set in that kind of dystopian future, but I really wanted to look at it through the lens of medicine and physicians and what is that like? So that's what I'm working on as a book. I took the handholder short story and I've sort of fleshed it out more and writing just a traditional novel because I think I've written so much on Twitter that Twitter is a little bit like writing in a box. You have to fit everything into these like really, really constrained, limited, character limits and everything. I really just want to stretch my legs now and just write as much as I want and just kind of write traditionally and describe things as much as I want. So that's my writing project right now, as I'm writing a science fiction novel based on a short story.
Well, that sounds absolutely exciting. And I wish you all the luck and all the inspiration that you can find because I think for a writer, that's most important that you live inspired and that everywhere you turn, you find something that you want to turn into words. Although I would love to read more on Twitter as well. So please don't stop writing there. Every once in a while, drop us a little story.
Sure, sure. I think I'll keep that. That's a lot of fun to write. I think I'll still keep doing that periodically.
And I think it also teaches us as writers a lot about technique and a lot about being economical with words because like you said that's the only space you get and so you need to fit all your thoughts in that many words. So it's a great platform, you get to read quick, you get to read deep. And although yes, a full drawn out novel is a beauty in itself, but Twitter has its own perks, so please don't abandon us there.
Of course. No, I think you guys are stuck with me. I'm
Oh
not
yes.
going anywhere.
So well, that brings me to a wrap of this episode of Detangle. Dr. Sayed Tabatabai, it has been a real pleasure to have you on my show and to talk to you about your experiences as a writer, your experience as a published author, and your dreams of your new book. For all my audiences today, stay curious, stay healthy, and keep detangling life's mysteries with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.